Hi, welcome to another Videos from the Ville. I'm Charlie Greenewald, Professor Greenewald, and this is Government 241, Public Administration and Public Service. Today we want to talk about organizational theory. We've talked about organization, we've talked about organizational design. Now let's talk about organizational theory, okay? There are certain traditions of organizational theory. And by the way, what I'm going to do in this presentation is I'm going to take a graduate level course from the University of Virginia in organizational theory. I'm going to condense it into one lecture. So this is the whole semester condensed into one lecture. So I hope that it's useful for you. But traditions of organization theory, there's essentially three traditions. We have the classical tradition, we have the neoclassical tradition, and we have the modern tradition. Now the classical tradition lasted from the beginning of the field, the beginnings of this study, which was in the 19th century, to the mid-1930s. The neoclassical tradition began in the mid-1930s and continued to 1958 and the end of the 1950s. The modern tradition begins in 1958 through the present time. Now these time spans are of limited utility. They're not of much use because academic communities and industrial communities can use bits and pieces. They can use facets from each one of the traditions that will help them serve their own purpose, whatever that might be. Let's take a look at the classical period, and I want you to take a good hard look at your PowerPoints on this. You'll get to see photographs of the different individuals we're talking about, and some of the examples, or photographic examples from some of the things they studied and covers from some of the books that they wrote. Well, the first period, the classical period, is really epitomized by Frederick Taylor. Frederick Taylor, and there's a good picture of him on the PowerPoint slide there. Frederick Taylor was the most important individual in the formulation and the promotion of something called the scientific management movement. The scientific management movement. Frederick Taylor viewed organizations as formal machines that were comprised of replaceable parts. So Frederick Taylor's looking upon an organization as a formal machine, and it has bits and pieces or parts that can be replaced at will. What he did was he attempted to apply scientific methods. He attempted to apply scientific methods to increasing the productivity of workers and increasing the effectiveness of the managers, all for the benefit of society. So again, what Frederick Taylor is trying to do is to apply scientific methods to increasing the workers' productivity and the workers' effectiveness and the managers' effectiveness for the benefit of all of society. The classical period has a number of major characteristics. The classical period's first major characteristic is it views all organizations hierarchically. It views all organizations as having levels of superiors and subordinates. The classical period finds that the major value, the primary value, the thing most worried about is efficiency. Efficiency is the primary value of the classical period. The third major characteristic is that it incorporated specialization and standardization. And the fourth characteristic of the classical period was that there was a paternalistic, it was almost a condescending relationship between the managers and between the workers. So again, the major characteristics of the classical period would include a hierarchical view of organizations. Primary view is efficiency. We have incorporation of specialization and standardization, and we have a paternalistic, almost condescending relationship between the manager and workers. Well, the Neoclassical period, however, was founded by an individual by the name of Elton Mayo. Elton Mayo, with his quite surprising results from his Hawthorne studies. Elton Mayo was asked by General Electric to go to their plant in Hawthorne, Illinois, and do a study. They believed that their workers could produce so many parts with the existing conditions. They believed that they could improve lighting, and if they improved their lighting, their workers could see better and they could produce more. So they wanted to test this hypothesis. So Elton Mayo went to the GE plant in Hawthorne, Illinois, and set up 3 groups. One group was workers with the original lighting, another group of workers with less lighting, another group of workers with more lighting. And what do you think they discovered? They discovered that, lo and behold, all 3 groups produced more than the original groups had been producing. And why was that the case? Well, that was the case because the workers knew they were being watched. The workers knew they were being watched, and all of a sudden they said, look at management. Management must care about us. They're bringing in these high-priced scientists to study us. They must really care. We didn't realize how much they cared about us. So, therefore, they worked very, very hard, and all 3 groups produced more than the original workers had done. This is called the Hawthorne effect. When a group of people know they're being observed, they are not going to behave in a normal fashion. So this is called the Hawthorne effect and should be remembered in classes across the realm of social science. Anytime you're observing people in some kind of a study, there's a Hawthorne effect. So what we see happening here is social psychology takes a front row seat. Social psychology assumes an important place in the study of organizations. Here we find the group becomes the focus of organizational analysis. The group becomes the focus of organizational analysis. Organizations are conceived of organically with a life of their own and their own synergistic properties. We find that under the Neoclassical period there are 2 different models. And the first model is the human relations movement. The human relations movement. What are the characteristics of the human relations movement? Well, the characteristics of the human relation movement is that organizations are social as well as economic or technical. Organizations are social as well as economic or technological systems. So the first characteristic of the human relations movement, organizations are social systems. The second one is that motivations of workers are more complicated than the classical model. The third characteristic of the human relations model is the work group is the basic structural unit of the organization, the work group. The fourth characteristic of the human relations movement is that certain leadership styles are better than others. We know that. And number 5, the question of power. The question of power is not addressed. It's ignored. Well, organizational theory was continuing to develop and become much more complicated and more sophisticated. We find that human relations movement now was including environmental considerations in their analysis. When any study takes into account the environment, this is called an open system strategy. An open system strategy. When any investigation is not considering the environment, this is called a closed system strategy. And prior strategies in organizational theory had not considered the environment. So the earlier studies were closed systems strategies, and the latter ones were open system strategy. Well, this continuing work with the human relations model of the Neoclassical period would eventually lead to a second model, and that was the organizational humanism model. Organizational humanism model. What are the characteristics of the human relations movement? The characteristics of the human relations movement, and we'll take a look at all 5 of them. Whoop, we're going... I'm sorry, going the wrong way. Apologize. We already had done that. We have the open system strategy and the closed system strategy. Well, what I was trying to say, and went off the rails there, the work with the human relations model led to organizational humanism. That's where we wanted to be, organizational humanism. Well, we find that organizational humanism, they do consider the environment, but they place less stress on the group. They place less stress on the group, the work group. They look at human individual needs. Human or individual needs are the humanists' major concern. Group needs are the major concern advocated by human relations, and we find organizational humanists are looking at individual needs. So organizational humanists are concerned with making organizations more stable by being able to cope or adapt with change. Organizational humanists are concerned with making organizations more stable by being able to adapt or cope with change. Their foremost concern is how can we make organizations more democratic? How can we make organizations more honest? How can we make organizations more open? Well, in the Neoclassical period, one of the persons who was one of the greatest influence of this period, one of the greatest influences, was wielded by Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow, you know from other classes, he is responsible for developing the hierarchy of needs. And the hierarchy of needs simply says that humans have levels of needs that they must meet. And they need to meet the lower ones before they can address the higher ones. And he looks at 5 levels of needs for all of human beings, and they must go through this progression. First of all, we have physiological needs that we have to meet. Physiological needs are what? Our need for oxygen, our need for water, our need for food, our need for shelter. These are physiological needs. The next level of needs that we have are our safety needs. This is where we need to be protected from criminals, that we need to be protected from crime. We need law and order on our streets. So safety needs are our second order. Our third level of needs are social needs. Humans are just animals after all, and we like to socialize with other humans. So we have social needs. We want to have other people to share our trials and triumphs and our not just our defeats with, but our victories. We want to share life with other people. Above our social needs are our self-esteem needs. Next are our needs to be recognized as special in one group or another. After we're in a group for a while, we like to be recognized as something. The best dancer, the funniest, the best skier, the best boater, the best dressed. We all are after some kind of recognition from the others, self-esteem needs. And lastly, we have self-actualization needs. These are needs that couldn't be met by the average person, wouldn't have the chance to develop these before the 20th century. The only people that had the chance to engage in self-actualization were the large landowners, monarchy, people from noble families, people that had resources and time and land. You find that self-actualization needs are equivalent to the old recruiting motto of the U.S. Army, and that was, be all that you can be. Be all that you can be. That's what self-actualization is. Making the most of your God-given talents, making the most of your God-given gifts. That's what self-actualization is all about. Well, organizational humanists believe that if their recommendations are followed, efficiency will result. Efficiency will follow. Organizational humanists view man in a positive light, and they have a far more optimistic view of the future. Now, this comes to a period of around 1958. We had the development of modern organizational theory. And modern organizational theory can be seen through two writers. Herbert Simon, who won the Nobel Prize, is one example. Another one is James Thompson. These are two writers about organizational theory who represent the modern theory. Modern theory is actually a hodgepodge. It's a hodgepodge, it's a potpourri of other models. Modern theory is not a unified whole. So Herbert Simon and James Thompson are good examples of modern theorists. What modern theorists do is they analyze specific problems, and after they analyze specific problems, they're very descriptive with what's going on, not prescriptive, they're descriptive. There is an opportunity right now to bring a newfound unity to the field. They have an opportunity to bring this newfound unity to organizational theory. And that sort of catches us up. I think there is an opportunity here for graduate students, if you're looking to work for a master's degree or go on to a doctorate, you could take a look at where the field has kind of left off in modern theory and see if in fact we shouldn't be studying and writing about it now, that we are continuing it in a different form and looking at different things. But this is where we are in academia, and this is what I've come to you to report. So we're done with organizational theory.